It was the third time that week. A little girl in a sunflower yellow coat stood outside Buckingham Palace, pressing her fingers lightly against the black metal railing. Her hair was tied in two uneven pigtails, and her backpack was too big for her shoulders. She stared, not at the palace, but at the guard standing motionless on post. She didn't speak. She didn't wave. She simply watched, every day at the same time. And the guard noticed. Corporal Nathan Fletcher had served in the Royal Guard for nearly a decade. Dark blonde hair, lean frame, always immaculately polished boots. He had once survived a roadside bomb in Kandahar. He could stand still for 8 hours in July heat. He knew how to ignore everything. Everything, except her. Because this girl didn't act like the others. She never shouted, never tried to make him laugh, never posed for photos. She just looked. She had the eyes of someone listening to the world in a different way. And she always came alone. That Thursday, a woman approached from the side, mid-30s, kind eyes, holding a tote bag with the word interpreter stitched across it. She spoke quietly near Fletcher's post, not to him, never to him, but to the girl. "Ellie, time to go, love. You can wave goodbye." The girl didn't wave. She touched her hand to her heart, then pointed to the guard. Fletcher saw it. It wasn't random, a sign. The woman caught his eye just briefly, and in that moment, she mouthed 2 words. "She's deaf." That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He wasn't thinking about combat drills or inspection protocol. He was Googling one thing: how to say hello in British Sign Language. His hands, trained for discipline and salute, now moved awkwardly over a laptop keyboard, trying to shape a silent greeting. The next morning, Ellie returned. As the crowd swirled behind her, Fletcher stood motionless, except for the faintest, most forbidden motion. While standing at post, he shifted his fingers just once. A flat palm, extended, then tucked inward. "Hello?" Ellie's eyes lit up like the front gates had opened just for her. Ellie didn't laugh. She didn't gasp. She didn't run. She signed back, fingers dancing, her face glowing. It was fast, too fast for Fletcher to follow. But it didn't matter. She knew he'd spoken, with no voice, no break in discipline, just a moment of human bridge building. Behind her, tourists took pictures, oblivious to the miracle that had just occurred. Later that evening, while polishing his boots, Fletcher remembered a different kind of silence. Not the ceremonial silence of his post, but the one from the battlefield. When the explosion had rung in his ears so loud, he thought he'd gone deaf too. For 2 days he couldn't hear his unit, just the hum of static in his head. He had panicked then. Ellie lived in that silence every day. And yet she smiled more than most adults he knew. 3 days later, someone else noticed. Officer Davis, Fletcher's superior, leaned against a side column after shift and pulled him aside. "You moved. At post." Fletcher froze. "Just a hand. Barely a twitch. Care to explain?" Fletcher hesitated. Then, breaking every unspoken rule, he said, "She's deaf. I just said hello." Davis stared at him, unreadable. Then after a long pause, "Don't make a habit of it." But he didn't report it. And Fletcher knew what that meant. Some rules bent silently. A week passed, then 2. Every time Ellie visited, Fletcher responded with the same small, secret greeting, a single sign, a single moment. And then, one morning, Ellie brought something new. She handed her interpreter a folded note. The woman read it, smiled, and walked to the rail. "She wants you to know she's learning to draw. She made this for you." She held up a paper. A crayon drawing of a royal guard, tall and still. Beside him, a small girl holding his hand. Neither had mouths, but both were smiling. That afternoon, something changed. A man with a camera began filming nearby. He wasn't like the other tourists. He focused on Ellie, on Fletcher, zoomed in on their exchange. Fletcher didn't move, but he noticed. 2 days later, the video was online. It had over 2 million views in a weekend. Royal Guard communicates with deaf child in sign language, breaks protocol for kindness. The caption was glowing, but the ministry wasn't happy, and Corporal Nathan Fletcher received a summons. Corporal Nathan Fletcher stood at attention inside the small ministry office, the kind that smelled like paper, old leather, and authority. Across from him, a stern woman with a file folder bearing the official emblem of the crown read aloud without looking up. Engaged in unsanctioned communication during ceremonial post, captured on video, circulated on digital platforms, unauthorized interaction with a civilian minor. He stood silent, not as a tactic, just instinct. She finally looked up. "Do you deny it?" He shook his head once. "No, ma'am." She stared at him for a moment, then said something surprising. "You made us human. That frightens people more than you know." She didn't strip his rank. She didn't reassign him. But she made herself clear. There will be no more interaction, not a glance, not a sign, nothing. Understood? Fletcher wanted to ask why. Why a smile was so dangerous. Why a girl's joy counted as a threat. But instead, he gave the only answer that wouldn't bury him. Understood. Outside, he stepped back into the gray light of London. The palace gates never looked so far away. Ellie came back the next day. And the next. But Fletcher didn't move. Not even a twitch. Ellie signed to him anyway. At first shy, then with small waves, then longer conversations he couldn't answer. She didn't understand why he wasn't signing anymore. Her hands stilled, her expression dulled. And after a week, she stopped coming. 10 days passed. On the 11th, Fletcher noticed something wedged into the base of the fence post. It was a folded drawing. He couldn't pick it up, not while on duty. But when his shift ended and the tourists cleared out, he circled back in civilian clothes and retrieved it. It was a new picture. The guard was still standing. But this time, the girl was walking away. A tiny gray cloud hovered over her head, and below it, scrawled in blocky crayon letters, "I miss the silent words." That night, he found himself outside the cafe where Ellie's interpreter usually waited after their palace visits. He didn't approach. He simply waited, watching from across the street. And when the woman rose to leave, he stepped forward, hat in hand. "Is she okay?" he asked. The woman paused, recognized him, smiled faintly. "She doesn't understand why you stopped." Fletcher swallowed hard. "Tell her it wasn't her. It's just rules." The woman nodded gently. She said, "It felt like you spoke louder than anyone else she knew, without saying a word." Then she walked away. 3 weeks later, something unexpected arrived. A letter from the office of the Minister for Disability Affairs. Inside, a printed screenshot of the viral video and a handwritten note. "In a time when many speak without meaning and post without purpose, you made silence meaningful. We'd like you to visit a school." There was no reprimand, no warning, just an invitation. The date was set. He arrived in full ceremonial dress. The children were waiting in rows, their faces eager. Most wore hearing aids or used sign language to talk. Ellie was there too, front row, bright yellow dress, sitting upright with her crayon pouch in her lap. The teacher signed, "Everyone, this is Corporal Fletcher. He knows some of your language. He learned it just to say hello." The room erupted, not in sound, but in hands waving joyfully. The deaf applause. Fletcher stood in front of them and signed slowly, "I see you." And Ellie cried. Back at the palace gates a few days later, a new crowd gathered, and among them, deaf children, tourists, teachers, veterans. They weren't loud, but they held up signs in BSL, respect. "Thank you. We hear you without sound." Fletcher stood tall, unmoving. But the moment he saw Ellie in the front row, he allowed himself a secret move. 2 fingers to the brow, then pointed to her. A soldier's silent salute. 2 weeks after his school visit, Corporal Nathan Fletcher received an envelope at the barracks. Inside was a formal letter stamped with the royal seal. You are hereby authorized to act as ceremonial liaison to the Office for Accessibility Initiatives. Fletcher blinked. He had expected silence. Instead, they gave him a title, a new post. And quietly, without a single press conference, they moved him to the South Gate, where more children visited, where Ellie always stood. On his first day at the new gate, Ellie approached the railing. She was older now, maybe by just a few months, but her expression had shifted. Still joyful, but deeper, a little more knowing. She handed something through the bars. It was a book. Inside, pages of drawings she had made. Each page showed him, standing tall, signing, silent, kind. One page stopped him. It was a drawing of him kneeling beside her, helping her write. Below it, scrawled in careful handwriting, "You taught me that quiet people are not empty, they are full." That same week, a visiting ambassador from Norway arrived for a private palace tour. His daughter was deaf. As they passed the South Gate, the little girl signed excitedly to her father. "That's the guard who talks with his hands." The ambassador paused. The father looked up at Fletcher. And for the first time, an international visitor requested to meet a guard, not for photo ops, but for what he represented. The palace approved it instantly. Fletcher saluted, then signed, "Welcome." 2 months later, Ellie's school invited Fletcher again. This time, not just for a visit. They had renamed a classroom. The Corporal Fletcher Room for Courage and Communication. The headmaster spoke solemnly. "This room isn't named for a man who spoke a lot. It's named for someone who showed that sometimes seeing someone is louder than hearing them." Ellie pulled him by the sleeve afterward and handed him her newest drawing. It was the 2 of them, both in uniform, both signing. It was Remembrance Day. The ceremony was about to begin. The guards would march in formation. No talking, no deviation. Fletcher stood among his unit, his boots polished, eyes forward. But in the crowd that day stood hundreds of deaf citizens. They wore badges with the British flag crossed with the deaf community symbol. They all stood in complete silence, not out of necessity, but out of solidarity. When Fletcher marched past them, he noticed something impossible to ignore. They were all signing at once. "Thank you." He did not respond, but his heart did. That winter, Ellie stopped coming for a while. School, weather, life. Then, one crisp January afternoon, she returned. This time with her little brother, also deaf. She guided his hands to form the first simple sign, "Hello." Fletcher stood at post. He saw it, and for the briefest moment, he made the smallest motion with his fingers, so small it almost disappeared. But Ellie caught it, and she signed something back with a calm, loving smile. "You still speak, even when you don't." Years later, when Fletcher retired from service, he returned to the South Gate in civilian clothes. He sat quietly on a bench nearby, watching the new guard stand tall. A woman approached and sat beside him. It was Ellie, now a teenager, confident, poised. She placed her hand gently on his. No interpreter needed. She signed, "I became a teacher." He smiled. Then she pulled something from her coat pocket. It was her original drawing, worn but intact. She said, "Because one guard broke a rule, I found my voice." Years later, tourists still visited Buckingham Palace. Many never noticed the small plaque near the South Gate, but those who paused long enough to read it saw this: "In honor of those who speak without sound." He never moved, but somehow he changed everything. Ellie Whitmore,